Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, especially as votes are about to be called, and really appreciate the opportunity to stand here with my esteemed colleagues. We are here as we introduce our resolution for a two-state solution. It's been 157 days since the horrific, brutal attack on October 7th in Israel. And in those 157 days, we have seen incredible bloodshed. We have seen a region that is important to the globe be caught up in a conflict that has been devastating to everyone there in that region, but to really all of us who care about an enduring peace in the Middle East. As we heard from President Biden last week, he stated very clearly and has been working very diligently on establishing a two-state solution, on ensuring that we bring home the hostages, ensuring that we end the suffering and the famine that is happening in Gaza, where we have seen tens of thousands of people, including children and women, die in this conflict. But the president stated very clearly that the ultimate goal is the two-state solution and an enduring peace. And because this is such a critical moment in global history and in what is happening there, we believe it's very important that the Congress stand up and reaffirm our commitment to a two-state solution. We have nearly 100 co-sponsors on this resolution. I'm very proud of the number of people that have come together to speak with one voice and stand united about the hope and the vision that we share with so many for a two-state solution. I'd like to introduce one of our original sponsors, my colleague from the state of California, Sarah Jacobs.
Well, thank you, Veronica, for bringing us all together on this really important issue. I'm incredibly proud to be Jewish and to be deeply connected to my Jewish roots and my family who lives in Israel. As a child, I spent every other summer visiting my family in Tel Aviv, and on the other summers, my cousin would come to San Diego, and we would all go to camp at the Jewish Community Center. I have been from the northernmost to the southernmost part of Israel. I have prayed at the Western Wall. I've stayed with Bedouin families in Segev Shalom, spent time in Shahar Negev, San Diego's sister city that suffered a brutal onslaught on October 7th, and I've even visited Gaza and the West Bank. During those summers, I had many, many conversations, and I made friends with Israeli Arabs and Palestinians and bonded over our similarities. From my Palestinian friends, I heard about their lives and their dreams for dignity, for self-determination, and most importantly, for a Palestinian state. Because just as Israelis have a right to exist in safety and security, Palestinians have a right to sovereignty and self-determination and through their own state too. And here's the deal. This is not just about what's right or what's wrong. This is actually about the safety and security of Israel, because we can't go back to the status quo from before October 7th. It actually did not keep Israelis safe, and it didn't keep Palestinians safe either. And what we're seeing happening now isn't the answer either. The Netanyahu government has spent months dropping tens of thousands of bombs, munitions, and shells all over Gaza to root out Hamas, but Hamas still exists. This may be a painful truth for some, but a military-focused solution won't eliminate Hamas or the other threats to Israel. The only way Israel can truly eradicate the threat posed by Hamas is by addressing the core grievance that have fueled recruitment and support for decades: the lack of a Palestinian state and Palestinians' right to self-determination. And that's why I strongly believe that a two-state solution is the best path forward for lasting peace, safety, and security for Israelis, Palestinians, and the region. And this should not be controversial. This has been the United States policy for decades. So I am so proud to support this resolution. I urge all of my colleagues to support it. And now I will introduce my colleague, Rep. Jamie Raskin.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to Congresswoman Escobar for convening us and for her great leadership in advancing this resolution for a two-state solution. Every summer, I have one intern who comes from Israel and another intern who comes from the West Bank or from Gaza. And I'm always moved by how much the young people of the region want to get beyond the cycles of terrorism and war and suffering and violence. And of course, we're in another such cycle right now. We're in a time of great crisis, and I'm very happy that we're meeting to have a coalition supporting movement towards a two-state solution. But that's going to come after some prior steps. We need to demand and insist upon the release and the return of all of the hostages, Israeli and American and other nationalities, still being held by Hamas. We need to have an immediate comprehensive ceasefire in conjunction with return of the hostages. We need to surge humanitarian assistance into Gaza to meet the dire needs of the suffering population. More than 30,000 people have died. 90% of the population of Gaza have been displaced and rendered homeless by virtue of the war, and there are famine-like conditions beginning to develop in the country and great hunger. So we need to address that humanitarian crisis, but then we need to address the underlying fuel for terrorism and violence and war, and that means we need to get behind a two-state solution. I'm hoping that our great President Biden will lead America in the world in advancing a peace strategy to secure Israel, to remove the terrorists in Hamas from leadership and get us to a meaningful two-state solution. So I'm delighted to be part of this effort. And again, thank you, Congresswoman Escobar. Oh, and next on the list is Congressman Brad Sherman.
Hello, I'm Brad Sherman from California's best named city, Sherman Oaks. Veronica has done a spectacular job not only in creating this resolution, but lining up 100 co-sponsors. For 28 years, I've served on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and for every one of those years, a two-state solution has been American policy, and it should continue to be. But my years of concern for the people of the state of Israel goes back much further to watching on a grainy black and white television set the speeches of Abba Eban as Israel was blockaded prior to the '67 war. We must remember that Hamas is absolutely opposed to a two-state solution. And those who are shouting from the river to the sea, their second line is, Israel will be Yidden free, that every Jew must be expelled from the Middle East. We see a Palestinian Authority that takes the position that there should be two states, but they should both be Arab states. And that is not what this resolution calls for, because the Palestinian Authority calls for this, quote, right of return, to say that any Arabic-speaking person who claims, and there are no records, that any of their ancestors ever lived in Israel should be able to move there. That is not what this resolution calls for. This resolution calls for two states for two people. And then there are those on the Israeli side who seem to be moving away from what is still the official government position, and that is a two-state solution. And they raise a number of issues. They say that, well, if there's a Palestinian state, then it must be free to allow Iranian military bases on its territory. There are many, many states, well recognized, that by treaty have committed themselves not to allow such a thing. And while Canada is a wonderful and independent country, if they were going to be the basis of a huge Iranian or Russian military base, the United States would probably act to prevent that. There are those who say that such a state would be a haven for terrorists. Obviously, that is a concern. But, even with a statehood, it is possible that Israel would carry out an attack against terrorists. No one doubts that Pakistan is a state, yet we killed bin Laden on their territory. It shouldn't be necessary. Pakistan should not have allowed bin Laden to live there. Likewise, my grandfather went into Mexico as part of the U.S. Army going after Pancho Villa. Mexico is a state. We defend ourselves, and Israel will defend itself. But a two-state solution for two people is where we have to be. And the only thing that I see on the Israeli side that prevents it is if there is a Palestinian state, there will not be any new Israeli settlements on their territory. And the settlements that are deep into the West Bank have got to stop. Many of them are in violation of Israeli law. Many of them are populated by people who are there for the purpose of preventing a two-state solution. And so I would call on Israel to start by enforcing its own law. We need a ceasefire. We've had one in return for release of hostages. That has to happen again, and if it does, we can put huge quantities of food into Gaza. And finally, we need a permanent ceasefire. That requires Hamas to leave because they've declared that they want to do October 7th again. So with that, perhaps excessively long speech, it's my honor to introduce my colleague from Texas, Al Green. Oh, you're not on, you're actually not on the list, but Mr. Carson, Marcy, is Marcy here? There she is. She snuck in. Come on in, Marcy.
Thank you, Brad. And as with the others, I want to thank Congresswoman Veronica Escobar for calling us all together and doing such a fantastic job in assembling that number of members to support a two-state solution. The invasion Hamas fighters launched from Palestinian Gaza into Israel on October 7th of last year broke the ceasefire that had hung over the region, though tensely, for a very long time. And I'm sure others have mentioned that 1,200 innocent Israeli civilians were slaughtered, and rape was used as a weapon of war. Roughly 250 Israelis were taken hostage by Hamas, of which roughly 100 remain still in captivity. And since that strike, Israel's invasion of Gaza has reportedly resulted in more than 31,000 Palestinians killed and nearly 1 million Gazans displaced. We have witnessed this horror night after night as old animosities and raw hatreds spill over generation after generation. The extraordinary death toll will resound for generations forward. So, how does one create a lasting peace born of such fierce, enduring hatreds and violence? How does one do this? Immediately, people of hope and goodwill must address the lack of humanitarian aid threatening Gaza with famine. And this morning we saw that the World Kitchen and the ship from Cyprus is moving and headed toward Gaza, and hopefully will be able to be successful in moving 200 tons of food into that region. We pray for that. I applaud the administration's recent airdrops and announced sea lane that will help to alleviate some of this suffering over a longer term. And we are hopeful that this can be successful under the circumstances. However, it's very difficult. Most importantly, for a just and permanent peace, as my colleagues have said, a two-state solution must be secured. For decades, I've called for that, and under current circumstances, I think we have to think about a solution that involves a protectorate cordon to allow adjustment to this status in a very difficult war-torn region. I'm proud to continue advancing this essential policy of the United States and want to thank my colleagues for affirming Congress's support for peace. I look forward to working with them and the administration to achieve that which to date has eluded the world for too many decades. Let us end this cycle of violence and let the world community provide a barrier with a necessary military presence to separate warring factions. Let us all work together to produce the map for the first time in history, that will begin the road to coexistence and eventually a just and lasting peace. Thank you so very much for allowing me to comment today at this historic time. Thank you.
Would like to introduce now our colleague, Andre Carson.
Thank you, Representative Escobar, my friend and neighbor, for your leadership, and thank you to my colleagues. Let me start by saying Ramadan Mubarak. Today, individuals from different communities, different backgrounds, and different faiths are all united under one humanity. The humanity of 31,000 Palestinian men, women, and children who have already died. The humanity of thousands of displaced in Rafah who want to reassure that their children are safe, but they're not safe. They're starving. The humanity of my Jewish brothers and sisters in the U.S. and abroad who are receiving very disgusting anti-Semitic threats. The humanity of the Israeli and Palestinian hostages who still need to be returned to their families. Palestine has a right to exist, just as Israel has a right to exist. As all human beings have a right to exist in freedom, safety, and autonomy. That is why we are advocating for a two-state solution. But first, we need an immediate and permanent ceasefire. Israel must end her relentless bombing of innocent Palestinians. It does nothing to advance peace. It only furthers the growing, devastating humanitarian crisis. A peaceful two-state solution is the pathway forward because it recognizes the humanity of all individuals. A two-state solution must ensure Palestinians are not treated as second-class citizens. And long before October 7th, which was wholly unacceptable, we all condemn it, every major human rights organization, the entire world, called for an end to the systemic oppression of Palestinians. The current two-tier system must end. We must end the discriminatory treatment of Palestinians as second-class citizens, of military occupation and blockades, and daily dehumanization. No human being has less value than another human being. No human being is illegal. Every human being has the right to safety, security, and certainly freedom. This is what we believe as parents, as Democrats, as civil rights advocates, as Jewish brothers and sisters, as Muslims, as Christians, Buddhists, non-theists. We all believe in humanity. A two-state solution puts our principles into practice. This is what America must demand. We need a ceasefire now to save lives and to end the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We need a two-state solution to end the oppression of the Palestinian people and to allow Palestinian and Israeli brothers and sisters to live in safety, security, and dignity. Thank you.
I'd like to now introduce my colleague from our state of Texas, Joaquin Castro.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman Escobar. I'm Joaquin Castro. I'm very proud to represent my hometown of San Antonio, Texas, here in the House of Representatives. And Congresswoman Escobar, thank you for convening us. Thank you for your leadership on this issue as we continue to push for both a ceasefire and a long-term path towards peace. And that includes a two-state solution. Last November, I went to a screening here in the Capitol complex of footage from the October 7th attack on Israel. The year prior, I'd visited Kfar Azar, one of the kibbutzim that was attacked. And seeing how the quiet tranquility of a peaceful community could be so quickly shattered by violence is something that I'll never forget. But 6 months after that attack, the human tragedy in Gaza is equally impossible to ignore. More than 30,000 people are dead, most of them women and children. Newborn babies are starving to death because their mothers are too hungry to produce any milk. In Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu is waging a campaign and has waged a campaign of collective punishment against innocent Palestinians that threatens to engulf the Middle East in a regional war. In Gaza, Hamas fighters, meanwhile, are sitting in tunnels while entire bloodlines of the Palestinians they claim to fight for are wiped out above their heads. To bring an end to this carnage, the world needs to make a credible guarantee to Israelis and Palestinians that offers hope for a future beyond the violence and retribution that have become the mark of their current leadership. I'm proud to stand with Congresswoman Escobar and others to introduce this resolution affirming the State of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish democratic state and recognizing the inherent right of the Palestinian people to sovereignty and self-determination through a Palestinian state. People in Israel and Palestine have lived in fear for too long, and they deserve to hear that in the United States, the Congress is committed to a two-state solution as the best path to achieve lasting peace. The human cost of the tragedies in Israel and Gaza are bigger than partisan politics. We have a moral obligation to bring this conflict to an end, and this resolution is an important sign of our commitment to that peace. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Congressman Castro. And we will close out with my other colleague from Texas, Mr. Al Green.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Escobar. Thank you to all of my colleagues who have assembled. Friends, what Hamas did on October 7th was horrific, and there is no way to justify it. It was a dastardly deed beyond comprehension. It is my belief that we can never allow such things to happen without making it perspicuously clear that we are antithetical to them and that we will always stand for justice, not just war, but justice. And the Israelis deserve justice. On May 14th of 1948, Israel declared itself a state. President Truman was the first world leader to recognize it as such. When it did so without the consent of Palestinians. The United States did it unilaterally, and Israel became a state unilaterally. What Truman did in 1948, Biden can do when it is appropriate. We don't have to have the consent of Israel for Palestine to become a state. It is time for us to move forward. History demands that we deal with the injustices. Posterity is going to judge us harshly if we allow the circumstances that have developed over the years to continue. We have it within our power to make a difference. I do believe that the thousands of babies that have lost their lives as a part of an injustice. You cannot, in the name of justice, create an injustice and believe that it is just. An injustice in the name of justice is still an injustice. And killing thousands of Palestinian babies is an injustice. I marvel at how people can understand the wrong in killing Israeli babies, but then condone the killing of Palestinian babies. We have it within our power to change this circumstance. A two-state solution is the methodology, the means by which we can do this. I support it. I thank Congresswoman Escobar for bringing this resolution to my attention. And I pray that we will have a ceasefire, bilateral, both parties, everybody stop killing, so that we can move forward in the interregnum to a two-state solution. I thank you.
I'd like to close out. Votes have been called, but I would like to close out by thanking my colleagues. We are a diverse caucus, and we have a diversity of experiences, backgrounds, perspectives, views, but where we stand united on this resolution is the idea of hope and peace for a region that desperately needs it. We will continue to work together toward that peace, that two-state solution for the dignity of every human being in the Middle East. Thank you all so much. Appreciate you all being at the press conference. And thanks to my colleagues.